This is such a cool thing to be able to say, so I just have to say it. John Coletti saved the Ford Mustang. In the 1990s and early 2000s, he basically built Ford's special vehicle team. He grew it into a standalone business from almost nothing, justifying and helping birth a remarkable collection of projects, cars that everyone remembers. In addition to that Mustang moment, he chiefed the development programs that led to the second generation F-150 Lightning, the SVT Focus, the Cobra R and Cobra Terminator Mustangs, and finally, the car he's most proud of, the 2004 Ford GT supercar. Coletti's retired now, but he spent 33 years in Dearborn. And yes, he was essentially responsible for saving the rear-drive Mustang in the early 90s, when cost cuts meant it was due to be replaced by the front-drive Ford Probe. That's the nature of car making. It's always a battle, always a series of negotiations. You win some, you lose some, and you spend a lot of time figuring out how to turn losses into wins. This show is all about that sort of thing. On this podcast series, we examine what happens when things go wrong in the world of cars, what we learn when we fall down, how we use that knowledge to get better, and how getting back up helps make us who we are. I'm Sam Smith. I'm a journalist and a club racer, and I love stories. Welcome to Driven to Fail.
I want to start with, I've long had this fascination with how car companies make decisions. The fact that most of the process is rooted in, like it spreads across all different types of companies, but car companies in particular, because of what they build. At the end of the day, if the thing they're building is any good, there is some intangible appeal to it, right? You know when it's there, and more important, you know when it's missing. There's an old quote that our producer Mike has heard me trot out 1,000 times. It was originally written about movies, right? The idea that there's so much that has to go into any given film to make it even happen, that it's amazing that good movies exist at all, right? Because any movie, just like any new car, any vehicle, anything that costs that much money, has that many moving parts, literally and figuratively, there's so much to go wrong. So you've been into cars since you were young. You street raced for years. You grew up from a very young age near Detroit. What did you think straight out of school when you got into the business? Did you have any idea of just how complex it was, how much can go wrong when you're trying to build something worthwhile?
Well, when I first started out in college, I became a mechanical engineer with the prospect of actually joining one of the auto companies, and I was just happy to get a job, to be honest with you. Okay. I mean, we come from a very poor family, and to be hired by one of the big three was super. Okay. I will tell you that my original preference was to join Chrysler, but they never gave me an offer. Okay. So I ended up, and what would happen in those days were I went to Wayne State University for my bachelor's degree. The auto companies would just come in and buy up the whole class of mechanical engineers. Okay. And I didn't get an interview at Chrysler. Three of my good friends all went to work at Chrysler. And then I didn't get any, no GM interview, no Ford interview. And I thought, oh my God, I was really quite upset. And then it was, I think it was like December 19th or something, because I graduated in the fourth quarter. I got a call from Ford. They wanted to do an interview. Well, at that point, I was kind of hard up. I was feeling like I was left behind, and I ended up taking that interview, and I started working at Ford on January 2nd of the 1972. So, and then I thought it was kind of funny because the how I got the job, my supervisor finally told me, because of my kind of like, I was a little gritty, streetwise. Okay. I wasn't your polished college kid at the time.
Yeah.
And my first assignment, believe it or not, was follow AJ Foyt around that was my first, and they said, I said, well, why'd you guys pick me? And he said, well, he's already gone through 3 engineers, kind of chewed him up, because he's pretty tough character.
Right.
And we figured a streetwise, gritty guy like you might be able to survive.
Okay, so I want to get back to that in a second, because that whole part of your career, that you were, basically the Autolite motorsport rep in a lot of ways. You traveled around with
Spark plugs,
yeah.
Autolite spark plugs, yeah.
Right. You traveled around with guys like Foyt and Andretti, and there's a lot to mine there. But getting back to, so when you showed up at Ford, did you have any idea of how cars got built, how the process is?
No, absolutely not. It was first off, the bureaucracies that these big companies create.
Yeah,
they have got all the jobs down to such a microscopic. I mean, you are actually pigeonholed into, I was doing spark plugs.
Yeah.
Okay. But even worse than that, I didn't get the whole spark plug. I used to have a good time with my senior engineer. I remember when they increased the gap from 32 thousandths to 44 thousandths, I says, geez, my responsibility now has gone up 35%. I said, the gap on the spark plug is bigger. That's all I had was the air gap. I said, you got to be kidding me. Or, I mean, so you have every person has such a small piece of the action.
Yeah.
That you never see the big picture. I mean, nobody.
So there was like an insulator guy, there was a tip guy, there was an air gap guy, all of it.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's broken down to such a small level, and you end up being put in one. You end up with one piece of responsibility in a component, then that component is part of a subsystem, and then that subsystem is part of a bigger system, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing until it becomes a car.
Which, when you think about it that way, it goes back to the movie thing, right? It's kind of amazing that, any of it happens at all. So you start your career at Ford doing that, and you're traveling around, like I said, working with guys like Andretti and Foyt. And Foyt, famously, the guy was a porcupine, is a porcupine. And he's prickly, and there's a lot of rules and things are dealing with him. But what's that?
Let me say something positive about him, because he can be. I went to the Phoenix race, the Phoenix 150, and I think it was April. That's where USAC used to start the season.
Yeah.
And, Andretti, Mark Donahue, the Unsers, everybody. I mean, during that week, here I am. I got to meet all the legends, right? I mean, they're all there. And while all the other guys would sit there, up against the guardrail talking to their mechanic who was working on the car, where Foyt was? He was under the car, wrenching his own car. I mean, he would be yelling out, "Give me this and give me that," and all that stuff. Give me. But you know what? I looked at that and I thought, coming from a street guy, because that's what I grew up in the streets in Detroit. Coming from a street guy, I thought that was impressive. I mean, Andretti was a good-looking guy, nice suit, nice clothes on, everything else, but he didn't have any grease on his fingers. Whereas AJ, he was under the car.
I love
yelling his brains out.
I love that the guy's whole story is basically, I mean, it's like the definition of what happens in the mid-century if you try and get lucky and then try harder and just never stop trying, right? Yeah, even on into how late he stayed in Champ Car in the 90s, how he was a fairly large guy cramming himself into a 1,000 horsepower turbo Champ Car. I mean, it's a hell of a thing. But so given your background, so you ended up doing that, and then from there you ended up moving into, a couple of books told me that you spent time in Ford's stillborn turbine and rotary programs. And
well, here let me give you what happened. So please. In 1973, Ford got out of racing. We had the big emission crunch,
right?
And it just, and the company just flat out canceled all racing. Okay, which kind of put me out of work. But I loved engines. But at the time, there was an engine experimentation era going on, Wankels, turbines, Proco. And to me, they were all, I was fascinated by the technology. And it was interesting. And you wanted to get into something new. As a matter of fact, here, you know what these two are? I got them on my desk here.
Plugs, but one.
Okay, this one here, I was able to abscond from the GM Wankel in 1973.
So he's holding up. If you're not watching the video, he's holding up a small canister that's got a tiny.
This is the AC. This is the AC plug that came out of the, and it had what they call an annular gap. In other words, there's no electrode on the end.
Yeah.
anyhow, so I got onto the Wankel engine, the Wankel program, and I developed this one. This was my first design ever.
Okay.
And I can't tell you how I got a hold of the GM one, because espionage in those days was kind of interesting, but I got a hold of
Right.
one. And
Right.
here's the Ford response. So that ended up going onto the Ford Wankel. Now, neither one of the engines actually ever made it into production, but it was interesting as hell at the time.
But it's this whole period, right, where the definition of, it's kind of like now, right, and in terms of how the definition of the automobile was in massive flux after being somewhat stagnant for several decades. And so you had companies like Ford taking a serious look at, like I said, turbines and rotaries and all of that. Those programs were eventually shut down. But given your background and having come out of the racing program a little, did any of that work change how you thought about engineering or building things for a living, or like how did you look at learning in that period?
Well, my thing, what was driving me at the time, obviously, I loved engines.
Yeah.
And here I am in the spark plug area. I ended up getting my first management position, a senior engineer in the ignition system area. But I knew that I wanted to be in the engine group. If I was going to make a difference, I said, I got to get into one of the engine groups. Okay. I had a really nice job in ignition. I could have, it was very comfortable.
What do you mean a really nice job in ignition? Because most people hear that they're like, what?
I had vendors. I could have done vendor lunches all day long, golf outings, parties. I mean, this was because I was in a decision mode. And what happens is, in those days, all the suppliers, they're always trying to get in with the management.
Right.
Okay. And it was like I say, it was a very comfortable position. I could have been lured into it for the rest of my life, actually. But I thought to myself, this is not what I worked for. I want to do something comfort is great, but I wanted to do something else. Yeah. So anyhow, I ended up asking for a transfer to one of the engine groups, and they told me, well, you're going to need a master's degree for that. So I said, all right. So I went off and got a master's degree in engineering. Then they transferred me. Okay. And I ended up with this really crummy job. Okay. But it was in program control, they called it, which was, it was almost an audit group for the rest of the engine. I didn't actually get into an engine system group.
I was going to say, what does that mean? Because
well, our chief engineer, I got to work very close with the chief engineer of all the engine groups.
Okay.
And I would have to set up the meetings with the groups and keep the new programs on track for cost, power, performance, fuel economy, weight, all the metrics that are important to an engine system.
Right.
And while it was really kind of a crummy job because everybody hated me, nobody wanted to be on the agenda. And when I called, they'd say, it was like your proctologist calling, right?
Wait, so they hated you, or they hated the work?
They hated, yeah. If I called, they just hated a call from me. I mean, that was the kind of job you had.
Yeah.
So, but what ended up happening, I just kind of kept doing my best, right?
Yeah.
And I was exposed to the management, and eventually they made me what they call a chief program analyst on the truck programs. And I got to work with the truck office, and you may not know this, but we were actually successful in putting fuel injection on the Ford trucks before the cars had it.
Right.
Okay, because I think it was 84, 85. I mean, it's going back a ways now. You're talking almost 40 years ago. But right. The truck office said, "What's the best fuel system you guys got?" And I said, "Well, that's port injection." Well, let's do it. Okay, even though it was very expensive at the time. And then what happened is, working with the truck office, I said to myself, you know what? Just the same motivation that I had to get to an engine group.
Yeah.
I said, the really good stuff is at the vehicle office. And that was across the street from us. In other words, get on a vehicle program. It's nice to be in the engine program, but you want to be on a vehicle program. But then they told me you need an MBA for that. So I went off and got an MBA. I asked for a transfer. Sure enough, I get over there, and then I end up with another crummy job. You know what cafe planning manager is?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah. At the time.
Right.
And you want to talk, did they hate me when I used to call them at the other job? You should see what it was like. I actually had a hate mail board in my office.
So for people who don't know, CAFE is corporate average fuel economy, right?
Yeah.
And it's something every corporation, every car company worries about, because the balance, it's almost like accruing a set of points, right? To be legal, and you have to meet a certain average. Yeah. And your job was basically,
get on everybody's case, get on the program team's case. Hey, you guys got to take 6 pounds out, or get this out, or get out. I mean, it was just, anyhow, so, like I said, I did that for about a year and a half. So my reward for getting the MBA was to get this cafe. And I always look at it as I had to go to hell before I got to heaven, right? Kind of thing,
Right. So let's get to that. So in, what was it, 87, 88? They make
in 87, 88.
They make you the design manager for 3 cars, for the Tempo, the Escort, and the Mustang. And
that was 88. I got a call. Yeah. My Ken Dabrowski came down to my office as cafe plant, and I thought, Ken was he was an executive engineer, but he was an old friend of mine from Powertrain. And he just came in, sat down, and said, John, what I'd like you to do is, he says, we'd like to make you the design manager for the Tempo, like you just said, the Tempo, the old Escort, and the Mustang.
Right.
Now, you got to keep in mind, at that time, all 3 of these were what they call sunset programs.
Yeah, they were set to be killed, right? In the next few years, dead. Which means that after all these, quote unquote, crummy jobs, and you get your MBA and you come back, and now they're like, here, take these things that are dying.
But you know what? It was still better in cafe planning. So it was a step in the right direction.
Right.
So,
right.
So I said, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
And then so I started doing that. And of course, like you say, they were all sunset programs. So it was really kind of managing them as they died, managing them to their grave. Okay.
Yeah.
But the Mustang was interesting. We got a new group vice president at the time that came over from England. His name was Alex Trotman.
Right.
And our company, Ford, had determined that the Mustang had that was it. It was, the Fox body, as you know it, was going to die in 92. But we get this Brit come over, Scottish guy, Alex Trotman, and he was, we got to see what we can do about the Mustang. So he gets Dabrowski aside, apparently in some meeting.
Yeah.
And he says, we need a fresh eyes approach to this Mustang. He says, you guys keep telling me what we want, we can't afford, and what we can afford, we don't want in terms of program content,
Right.
So he said, we need a fresh eyes look at it. So one day Dabrowski calls me into his office, because I had the Mustang, right, design. And he explains the situation. He says, you want to take a shot at it? And I'm sitting there. I was quiet, which is unusual for me, actually. And because I was thinking, are you giving me a chance to do the new Mustang? This is unbelievable. I mean, I've had this career of really crummy job. So anyhow, so he, I must have had like a pregnant pause or something. And he finally said, well, do you want the job or not? I said, Ken, I'd be honored. Think about it. You want to get back to your failure concept?
Right.
What's the worst that could happen to me?
Right.
I mean, I'm constantly doing that assessment, do I, what happens if it goes this way, or what happens if it goes that way? Well, if I succeeded, that was probably the low percentage outcome. And if I failed, it wouldn't be any worse than the guys ahead of me. Everybody else failed ahead of me trying to save the car. So what's the worst that could happen? Right. It wasn't fatal, bottom line.
Right. Right.
So we took it on, and we started, and we created what they called the Skunk Works at the time.
Yeah.
And we ended up, that ended up being the program that resulted in the 94 Mustang, which we call the SN95 Mustang.
Right. So that's an interesting moment, and I want to get back to that in a second. But what I find really interesting about it is that there's this, in the 70s and 80s, there was this grand movement, this idea that, the car business was changing forever. And a lot of these old ideas had to be kind of thrown away because of environmental controls and regulatory issues. And a lot of car companies felt that the sea change meant walking away from the past, from these much loved products that had defined the company. And in a lot of cases, there was usually, one person or a group of people that spoke up and was like, wait, this new thing is great, but it's not what we do. We need to figure out a way to make this thing actually us. Porsche tried to kill the 911 and replaced it with the 928 before, Peter Schutz, the CEO, famously came back in and said, no, you guys are going to keep going, right?
Mhm.
And you had the same moment with the Mustang where, you and a handful of people were smart enough to help recompass the company and get back on track with what that car was, and more important, could be going forward. And again, I want to get to that in a second, but there's this question that kind of orbits all of it. How so many car companies, good ones, bad ones, there's no real discrimination, but they're so often blind to how the customers see them, despite focus groups and surveys and obsession on all of those many levels in the bureaucracy. How does that happen? Why do you think that is? There's a disconnect there, because it's not just then; it's
Well-
all throughout history,
Well, first off, bureaucracies are created
right?
to eliminate any chance of a surprise or something unexpected. I mean, the whole idea is, to keep everything the way it is. I mean, that's the way bureaucracies are created. And
Right.
that's true in government, companies, large companies, everything. I mean, and the whole idea is, you don't want surprises, right? So what do? You put in all this redundancy and all this procedural stuff in there to keep everything, to keep surprises at bay. In other words, everything has to be very predictable. Well, if it's very predictable, you're always going to end up with nothing really good. Okay.
right.
And you want to get back to one comment you made earlier, is that how do you know, here I am being asked to do a car. I've never done a car in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, cars are complex in a big
Right.
company, right?
Right.
And I remember looking for, well, what's the process? I always had that curiosity. Well, how do you go about doing a car? And I went around the company looking. I couldn't find anything. I wanted to read up on it. There's got to be a manual. There's got to be a, here's the ABCs to doing Ford cars. I mean, somebody's got to have written something
Right.
down on this, right? And I never could find it. And then one day I came across this old guy, and he had a thing called the DAP, the design approval process. And I remember getting a copy of this thing, and I looked at it, and I mean, I walked away thinking to myself, you know what? I'm either too stupid to understand this, or this is more complex than anybody could ever figure. I mean, this is just, this
What
thing
did
was,
what did it look like? It was just a binder of like 1,000 rules, or
it
what?
was, I bet you it was, I don't know, a couple of hundred pages, flow charts and this and that and everything else.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, I'll never be able to figure this out. I don't know how the car, I actually at that point figured out, I says, I don't know how the company does it. I mean,
Turns out they don't
I'm looking,
either.
yeah, I'm surprised the company can actually do this, right?
Right,
That's
right.
that complex. And the reason I brought this up back to you is we were coming back from England on a company plane, and I'd had a couple of drinks, and my planning manager, Ron Miccioli, was with me. And how we design, we didn't pay attention to anything in the design. It was too complex to understand. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we did is I asked the stewardess for a few cocktail napkins, and we laid them out on the seat in front of us. And we said, well, look, if we're going to do a new car, this is job one here.
Yeah.
Right. And he says we just drew this out in about 5 napkins with an ink pen, after having a few drinks. And that became the timing plan for the new Mustang. We had never done a car program before, but we knew this is where we had to end up. So rather than doing what the car company did, saying, before we actually go into a car program, we got to assemble all these engineers. We got to do all this stuff and everything. They would front end load it and then work their way towards the end.
Yeah.
We started at the end and went backwards. And it was I said, well, you know what? This should work. It looks pretty easy to me. And that's how we did.
Yeah, which is it's funny, right? Because on the one hand, how difficult could it be, and then you go do it, and you don't know how difficult it is. Describe, and you probably wouldn't have done it if you had known how difficult it was. Describes everything from like having kids to building new cars. But on the other end, we orbit this topic a lot on this show. Is the idea of so often it's figuring out which rules you can break and which rules you can't break.
Yeah.
And sometimes not knowing the difference is really a strength. And the Mustang story in itself is so great in that moment. That the whole Mustang story is great, but the Mustang story in that moment is great because there was a lot of structure in place to have the car end up a certain way. So for people who don't know, so you show up and the replacement for the car, for the Fox body, was supposed to be the Ford, something like what turned into the Ford Probe, basically small.
Yeah, it was a
Mazda.
It was a Mazda.
Yeah, right. And as you said, the real issue was programmably liked, couldn't afford, programmably afford, didn't like. So there's all this stuff that happens. You set up a secret skunk works to work on a low-cost rear drive version of the car. That's the car that ended up being the SN95, the new Mustang that came out in the early 90s, off of a modded and tweaked and poked version of the Ford Fox body. And people inside the company are opposed to it. A lot of management doesn't know. Trotman finds out. You're given kind of a tentative leash to make this happen. And you said, forgive me because I love this, but you said at one point that they expected you to fail, and the worst that could happen, you said the worst that could happen is that you met their expectations.
Yeah.
So that's such a rare approach, but more important, how did it feel in that moment? Right? This giant weight lands in your lap. You get what you wanted. You figure out, okay, we could do this. And yet you also know it could all very easily go to hell. I mean, how you can't think about it, but at the same time, you can't not think about it, right?
Well, I like I said earlier on, when it first was given to me, it was a period of euphoria because, I mean, think about it. The Mustang at the time was a legendary brand. And I mean, I thought to myself, you mean a little old guy from the east side of Detroit's getting a shot at this, right? That kind of thing. And I'm thinking to myself, Ford's got a lot smarter people than me. I mean, a lot more experienced people than me. Why do you pick me? Well, once I got over that, I said I was just happy to get it. Okay. But then you start, the realities and the challenges start surfacing because there are quite a few of them.
Yeah.
And every one of them, it required a lot of effort to, you get scared. You're saying, because I don't want to fail. I didn't want to fail on anything. So as the challenges started arising, it was like, what's that game, Whack-A-Mole or something, where every time one
stuff just keeps popping up.
It just keeps popping up. I mean, unbelievable. Every week we'd get our group together because we'd meet Tuesday nights in my office at night after hours.
Yeah.
And there was never any good news. It was always something. It was always something. It was always something bad.
Give me an example of like an ordinary Wednesday night bad. I mean, what was it, game changing stuff or just, we got to get through this now? How did that work?
There was just so many.
Oh, it's okay.
There were just so many. For example, on the engine front, the emissions, the guys were telling, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, we can't do this. I was told that 225 horsepower was the end of the box on 5 liter. You couldn't do.
I'm sorry, what? Really?
No, that's what they said. The powertrain guy said that's it. You can't do anything. And I thought to myself, I says, come on, guys. I says, you're because at the time I was also interfacing quite a bit with the SEMA people.
Yeah.
I says, everybody's sporting more than 225 horsepower. Come on, we got to get with the program, guys. Oh no, that's it. Emissions. They gave me all the emissions and this and all that kind of stuff. And all the reasons it can happen. Yeah. And I had that on the body front and the interior. I had that on the fuel system. They only bring bad news to you on all the different fronts. Why the things that can't be done, and you got to overcome all of them. But we finally. On the engine front, I said, okay, well, fine, we'll stay at 225 horsepower. You know what they came in and told me next? Well, actually, John, all we can do in 94 is 215. I says, come on,
out of
guys.
a 5 liter V8.
Yeah. And I said, you mean to tell me the same hardware that you've been on the Fox body was 225. I'm talking about same intake, same camshaft, the same engine. I put it in the SN95 and it can only do 215. Oh yeah, that's all. That's a lot. I says, could you guys explain that to me real slow again? Why I'm using the same engine, but I lose 10 horsepower. And I mean, it's just that kind of stuff. And it used to drive, it would drive you crazy. But sum it all up, there was a lot of challenges, and every night I'd go home and I'd think, oh God, we're going to lose it because of this. We're going to lose it because of that. You know, rear end crash. You know, the fuel tank on the Mustang was behind the rear axle.
Right.
Well, you don't put, you know, the only way to get around rear crash was to put the fuel tank ahead of the axle. You know, like on the Thunderbird, all the so-called new modern cars were all, the tanks were located elsewhere. And I said, wait a second, guys, why can't we, you know, because I was trying to save cost and program investment and use as many carryover parts as possible. And I says, why can't we go ahead and reinforce the area around the fuel tank so that the tank doesn't crush when the car gets hit? Well, we haven't done that before. Well, I understand you didn't do it before, but why can't we do it now? You know? So we went off and we did a little a few experiments on that. We ended up coming up with a system where the tank didn't collapse when it got rear-ended. Well, guess what? If the tank doesn't collapse, it doesn't burst. I.e., you pass.
That's so, all of this is so indicative of the system, right? The stuff you described earlier, that you know, the bureaucracy and the stages and the layers, that's all there to keep anything unexpected from happening, to keep the aircraft carrier from running on the rocks, right? You know, because companies move slowly in turn.
I'll even give you a better one.
Yeah.
The old Fox, if you look at it, the old Fox Mustang is on the deck lid has what they call a gooseneck system, you know, to open and close it.
Yeah, the hinge.
And they told me on the new car I couldn't have a convertible because there's no place for the gooseneck the way we had designed the car.
Yeah.
I say, you guys got to be crazy. I'm going to have a new Mustang and not have a convertible model. Well, there's no place to put the gooseneck, right? So then I go off one day. I was in LA or something. And I ended up renting a Toyota, and it had a Toyota. I opened up I was always looking at competitive cars, you know, and it had this little like scissor little lever action. Didn't have goosenecks in the deck lid. And I said, well, why can't we use this? This solves the problem. There's no, you know, in other words, I can go. So I bring it back, and I was told, now this is Toyota uses it worldwide, right?
Right.
But they told us, no, won't work it here. Won't work on the Mustang.
But that's the thing, right? Those structures are set up to make everybody be okay with what's there.
Yeah.
And so when you're in the position of trying to do anything new within that structure, all you get is people telling you can't, it's wrong. So how do you stay positive in all that? I mean, if it's literally once a week that you're getting a raft of things, how do you keep your head up there?
Well, you got to keep, you got to keep questioning.
Yeah.
And you got to keep questioning. You know, like for example, it says, well, why can't we do this? You know, like on the on the latch, on the deck lid latch, or the hinge. And well, it won't do this, it won't do that. I said, but guys, Toyota uses it, for God's sakes. You know, they use this thing worldwide. Why can't we do it? And but long story short, you had to get, you know, because it wasn't invented here, NIH, you know, they're not invented here syndrome. But eventually they ran out of, I kept asking. I wore them down, bottom line.
Yeah.
And now that system is standard, and it's been standard on Mustangs and Fords for the last 30 years.
Is it common for people in those environments to, I mean, if you're constantly faced with somebody saying, you can't do this, this is why. I mean, after a while, you know, people fall into one of two camps. Are they going to keep asking questions and stay positive and work towards something? Or eventually you just get ground down and I mean, is it more common to get ground down than not? Because people, you know.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do get ground down.
I mean, so I guess what I'm getting at is, you know, you have a raft of cars that came out of your division, and the division you built, by the way, right? This business that you made viable. You have a raft of cars that came out of it that all evoked, you know, a certain kind of passion and and care, and that you cared about certain things. And yet, most performance divisions, most car companies don't have intense periods of greatest hits like that. And which, since they're all kind of built the same way, it's this weird moment where you look at it and you're like, oh man, most of it must just be full of people eventually just being like, man, it's Thursday, I got to go home. I can't fight this battle anymore. I'm sorry. Which is kind of amazing, because on the one hand, you think about what's at stake. On the other hand, you really have to remember that it really is thousands of people all having those moments where they're just showing up, and that fighting the fight, it takes a lot of patience. But
yeah, it takes a lot out of you too. I mean, when you got to confront that every day. What ended up happening after we successfully launched the Mustang in '94, I was hoping to get onto another car program, right, and do something. The next thing you know, now they shuttled me off to a group called SVE, Special Vehicle Engineering. And I'm thinking to myself, come on, guys, 3 times. Neil Ressler was the vice president at the time. 3 times he talked to me about it. The first time I said, no, I'm not interested. Come on. I mean, that group's not a real group. You know what I'm saying?
So this is basically what evolved out of SVO, right? Out of Ford's performance division that Walter Hayes set up, right?
SVO was part of, that was like turned into Ford Racing, SVO.
Okay. All right.
He had a second meeting with me, and I was still resisting. I didn't want it. And then at the third meeting, he says, look, you have no choice. You're taking the job. All right. So
they asked you 3 times.
Yeah.
So
the third time wasn't an ask, though. The third time was a tell. So I ended up doing that, because apparently the forces. You see what happened with the SN95. We upset a lot of apple carts when we did that program.
Internally, you mean?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I could tell you horror stories. I mean, all the people that were mad about that. Because well, for example, I'll give you an example. At the time, we went, to do the Mustang program, we needed body engineering, right? And the body engineering told us that they were full and they didn't have enough capacity to work on the Mustang. Well, that's kind of a showstopper, if you don't have body engineering, how are you going to get the car done,
Right.
So my planning manager at the time, Ron Macholi, he says, body engineering, I can get anywhere. So he says, he set up a meeting with 4 or 5 companies in Europe. So we went to Europe looking for a body engineering company to work on the new Mustang. Well, can you imagine these companies over there thinking Ford's going to outsource body engineering? I mean, they're salivating.
Right.
Right. I mean, the Mustang, they recognize Mustang as a big deal in Ford. And here's these two guys from Ford. They're out, canvassing what's available in body engineering world outside of Ford.
Yeah.
Right. And so we went out and we looked at 5 companies. Giorgetto Giugiaro, who was part of IED at the time, he was a design guy. Altamonte was the engineering guy there. There was IED was in here. ITEL Design was the name of the company. Anyhow, so we went through all the companies, and we finally put a request for quote out through purchasing. And you'd swear a nuclear bomb went off in the company.
You wanted to take it outside?
Well, yeah, I got called into the vice president, and he says, "What the hell are you doing?" I says, "Hey, we asked the body engineering guys to work on the Mustang. We told them what our time. We put in all the normal paperwork, all the normal requests, and they said they don't have the capacity. So, and Trotman wants me to do new cars. So I said we needed to have body engineering. So we figured if they don't want to do it internally, we'll just go outsource it. I just made the decision. I guess I was supposed to ask before I did it, but we just made the decision to go outsource. And long story short, that was not going to fly, because when it got all the way up to the CEO of the company at the time, what do you mean you're outsourcing the Mustang? Right? And what ended up happening was there was a program called the Win 88, which was the Windstar. You may remember the
minivan.
The minivan. That was outsourced, and the Mustang was brought back inside. Well, the guys at Body Engineering were not happy about that outcome. I mean, there was a lot of people that were very angry at our team, because they were
because it hadn't been done, because it was going outside the company, or both.
No, because they were working on the Win 88 program.
Yeah.
And they told us that they were at capacity and couldn't handle another program.
Right.
Then we come along and tell them, well, you're shuffling this one off that you've got, I don't know, it was 50% done.
Yeah.
Shuffle this one. Now outsource this one and bring the Mustang back in. Bureaucracies don't like those kind of surprises. Anyhow, so we had a lot of that.
Okay, so we touched briefly on SVO, which was kind of sort of Ford's in-house performance division until it became not, and was replaced by SVT, which was something entirely different.
Well, there was a gap there where there was nothing for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
But so SVO is interesting because in the United States, it basically resulted in one car. It resulted in an SVO version of the Fox-body Mustang.
Yes.
Turbo 4-cylinder. There are people who love it. Didn't do as well in the market as hoped. But there is a definite difference in approach between how the company looked at SVO and how the company looked at SVT. And it's, there is one existed for a bit and produced a vehicle and wasn't quite a good fit and mutated into something else. And the other had this raft of hit after hit after hit. There's a period of about 10 or 15 years where the cars your division turned out, were legitimately among the best of the world, and it was capped by the Ford GT, right? Which you famously called the not the best thing you've ever done, but probably your favorite, right? A hell of a crowning thing to go out on, right?
Yeah.
So what makes the difference in how, when you have two performance divisions like that? And I understand they were in different eras, different people, different priorities, but you could see it from 1,000 different companies. What one thing that works in one era with one group of people will not work across town with a different group of people with a slightly different change priority. Is there, when those things are set up in companies like Ford, is how they are set up dictated by corporate culture or dictated by the people who set them up at the top, right? So like when you come in, you can make SVT what you want, or you have to work to get it there over a long period of time.
Yeah, well, when I first got, it was called Special Vehicle Engineering when I first got there.
Sure.
For the first couple of years. I wasn't happy with what they were doing. One of the programs they had, they were gold plating all the chrome on the mark.
Yeah.
And I said, what the hell is Special Vehicle Engineering about this? It was all kinds of oddball programs like that, real bad stuff. And I didn't see that as where I wanted to take the division. I'm thinking to myself, if I got this job, I might as well try to do something decent with it, right?
Yeah.
And the first big gamble program I ever took was the 95 Cobra R. Now we were getting our butts kicked by the Camaros on the tracks at the time. They had a bigger engine. They had a 350. Right. We had a 302.
Yeah.
We got a small 14-gallon gas tank, and they got a bigger one. But bottom line is, we had a lot. Guys tried to race the Mustangs, but weren't being very successful at it. So I thought to myself, I said, look, there's only one way we're going to be able to compete with a Camaro. We need a 350 cubic inch motor, 351.
Right.
Well, there hadn't been a 351 in a Mustang for, I don't know, the past 15 years or something, 15 or 20 years.
Right.
But we were still making the 351 Windsor at our Windsor engine plant. So I got together with the guys. We would just huddle around, get my guys together, and we would just huddle around and start saying, well, look, if we did a new Cobra R, we're going to need a 351 motor. You can't put a 351. There hasn't been one in, all the reasons why. The other problem is with a 351, we're going to need a much bigger gas tank. Well, we can't afford to certify a gas tank big enough. We haven't got that kind of, resources to be able to put a program in place to go, certify for rear crash on a gas tank. Anyhow, but we finally decided, we built a car, a prototype. We would always start with build a prototype and convince ourselves what we had was good.
Okay.
that's kind of a rallying point for the team. They actually see hardware. It's not just paper. It wasn't just us talking around a table. So we built the car, and everybody kind of liked it. I said, oh yeah, this car's pretty, this would work. This would work. And on the gas tank thing, we knew we needed a bigger tank, but we didn't have the resources to fund the program to actually make a bigger tank work. And I said, well, why don't we just put a fuel cell in there? Fuel cell, I mean, the whole idea of a fuel cell is you crunch it and it doesn't explode.
Let me guess. Somebody said you can't do that.
Well, we've never done it, was that answer. Right?
Because there's a production car. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow, make a long story short, I had to work out a deal with the engine plant manager at Windsor. I went to see, his name was Cy Descharm, nice guy. And when I told him what I wanted, because we went through the Ford racing catalog and put together these heads with this camshaft. We just, based on our best judgment, put together an engine that we wanted.
Yeah.
And Cy said to me, he says, yeah, all right. He says, so when do you want to build these engines? Now he's thinking like in 18 months or 2 years, because you go through all the normal hoops. And I said, we were thinking in the next 2 weeks. And he says, he's told me I was crazy. And I said, well, that may be true. I said, but can you do it? And he looked at me and he says, you're serious? I said, yeah, I'm serious. Right. So he says, I'll tell you what, we got a warehouse 2 blocks away in Windsor. He said, if you assemble all the parts there, and I mean all the parts, we'll build the motors for you. I said, so I got the guys. I went back, told the guys, said, let's get all the parts together.
Yeah.
So I go on the day that we were supposed to have had all the parts. I go over to Windsor with Steve Anderson. He was my program manager on it. We go to the warehouse, and the place is empty. And there's a.
What did you expect? Wait, what did you expect to be there?
I expected to see boxes and boxes of stuff to build 250 cars. Right? And he says, I asked the watchman, I says, what happened to all the parts that are supposed to be here? Oh, the plant came by this morning. It took them all over to the engine plant. Oh, all right. So we go over to the engine plant. They were excited. They wanted to build them. You know what they had in this crib area? They just had 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and all it said was race car parts. Somebody wrote them on hand, race car parts. They were excited to be doing this. We're going to build 250 race car engines, right? Yeah. And all right, so we got that done. He built the engines. We were trying to keep the program on the QT. And what does he do? He invites the Windsor Star and the local TV station,
the papers and the media.
Oh Jesus, So then I got all these engines. I had to get all these engines out of Windsor, just bring them over. We shuttled them over to Roush, one of the Roush facilities, warehouses. And then I was talking to the plant manager at the Mustang Mustang assembly plant. And we found out that the plant manager was going on vacation. And I talked to Wheeler Stanley. He was the assistant plant manager. He says, well, we could build him during that week while he's gone. Because Luke, he said, Callaway will never go for this. I said, all right. So we ended up scheduling the build of the 250 cars while the plant manager is off in Puerto Rico on vacation. So Friday, I get a call from Wheeler, and he says, I got a picture of it here somewhere. All 250 cars are built.
Yeah.
And they're in the parking lot, and they had guards on, watching these things, right? And he calls me up, he says, Coletti, you got to get these goddamn things out of here. Callaway's coming back Monday. If he sees this, he'll have both our asses. So then I called Mascotech, and we shuttled them all off.
What was Mascotech? I don't know the name.
Well, they're
just another supplier. Or?
Yeah, another supplier. Yeah.
Okay.
And their facility was over at the old Chrysler Lynch Road facility. So we shuttled all the cars. I had them pick up all the cars and get them out. He said, if Callaway sees these, he's going to go nuts, right? And then we shuttled them all over there. And,
okay, so
they finished them off because there was some hood work they had to be done and a couple of other things. But the point of this whole story, it was all done. We knew what car we wanted. Our team was convinced we had the right car. We had built a prototype, had run it, and everything else. Now, getting it through the system wasn't going to work the normal way. So we just went off and, like I said, cut a deal with the plant manager at the Windsor Engine Plant, cut a deal with the vehicle assistant plant manager at Dearborn, and then had to use a supplier on the outside, Roush, and this other supplier to finish the cars off.
Which is nuts, because like the company is definitely better off for having those things been made, right? And the legacy and like all of the history that came out of that whole process, you had not only the company, but the brand and the Mustangs best interests at heart. And you were probably the best guy in the country to be aimed at that problem. And everything about the system was set up to keep you from doing it so much so that you had to go around it. And I
had to go around it. And then what ended up happening was all the cars were sold. We used the marketing guys used some kind of a fax system where, certain dealers were told these cars are going available, send your fax in. And they went right away. All the cars were gone, all 250. So about a week after the cars are all sold, right? My secretary, I came into the office. I just walked in. I was at some other meeting. She says, "John, there's a bunch of people in the conference room waiting for you."
They're all very angry.
Anyhow, so I walk in there and there's about 9 people in there, and they represented the automotive emissions office, legal, all corporate staff people.
And your stomach hit your feet? How did you feel?
Well, no, I knew that, they were, because I had violated a few protocols on the way to putting this car out. So anyhow, they started out with the big thing is, you do know that you broke a corporate policy.
Oh,
I said, I'm thinking just one, but anyhow. Yeah. And he says, because the 351 Cobra R was a gas guzzler.
Yeah.
And he says, we have a policy 109, signed by somebody, some CEO, one of the CEOs. That Ford will not build a gas guzzler. And I said, wait a second. I said, we have Aston Martins, they're gas guzzlers. Jaguars are gas guzzlers. They were all part of Ford at the time. I was looking at it, they're all under the umbrella. Why is it only Ford can't be a gas guzzler?
Right.
Right. And he wasn't accepting that at all. He says, you broke a policy. And then they went on, everybody, legal, everybody else told me all the things.
Just going around the room, guys, just telling you how you screwed up.
And you know what I did? I kept my mouth shut again, which was uncharacteristic. And then right at the end, I said, well, guys, I don't know what to tell you other than I'm sorry.
And
what? And the guy looks at me, I can't remember who the head guy was at the meeting, the legal guy. You're sorry. That's all you got to say? I said, well, what do you want me to do? I says, guys, the cars are out and the dealers are already sold. What do you want me to do? I'm sorry. Yeah. You know what they did? They packed up their bags. They packed up their bags and left.
Okay. How? Because what any reasonable person would expect there is that you got canned or you had to fight for your job. How did it just ended it?
It just ended.
There are so many.
I found out from that one is, you remember the old saying about sometimes rather than ask for approval,
forgiveness, not permission. Yeah.
Ask for forgiveness, not permission. You'll never get permission. If I'd asked for permission, and by the way, that program, we got it done from start to finish, from the time we decided, our little group decided we were going to build that car to the time we actually built it, 9 months. There is no program Ford Motor Company has ever done in 9 months.
So what I love about all of this and about so much of your whole story is just how much comes down to, and this is like true in a lot of modern car making or really making anything, but how much of it comes down to gut feelings and just saying, screw it. And, flying the airplane as it sits instead of sitting down there and staring at the map, right? And wondering where you're going to go or worrying about what's going wrong. But, so going back to those moments where you talked about how, in order to feel out something, if you had, a potential, engine car combination or even, suspension setup, something, you would build a prototype and look at it and drive it and decide if it was something you want to go forward, right? Which is another one of those moments where you just knee jerk, yes, this is happening. And I want to talk for a second. We're going to get back to the Mustang because there's a bunch of really interesting Cobra stuff, but I want to talk for a second about something I read about the Ford Lightning and your reaction to the first one. So the first one did not happen under your tenure. The first Ford Lightning was I believe it was 8th gen F-150.
Yeah, it was a 351 F-150.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. With, added power, suspension, seats, 1,000 other
Mhm.
things, handling signed off by Jackie Stewart, only offered for a couple of years, early 90s. And you were charged with making the truck that came after that, which is the Lightning everybody remembers. It's the new shape F-150, the kind of smoothed over, and it's the one that made more of a dent culturally. So you go to truck shows before that truck's even happened. You go to truck shows, you talk to owners, you find out that the people who bought the old Lightning love it, but internally they were telling you that's just not enough people. They had decided internally at Ford that the market didn't exist for the truck and that there was no reason to do another one. And Ford basically concluded it wasn't worth going forward with that. And you decided that it was different, that you figured out, or you thought, and you were right, that people weren't buying the thing because they didn't like it. How did you know?
Well, you got to
led
keep in
you
mind,
down that?
I'm going to take you back to
Please.
our staff meeting, and we were looking for, what are we going to do next? Okay. And on the Lightning in particular, we said to ourselves, if we did a truck, what hasn't been done before?
Yeah.
We didn't want to just do, because there was the big block 454 Chevy, and there was a lot of trucks. I mean, the Typhoon and all that stuff. I mean, think about a lot of performance vehicles that for some reason didn't endure.
Yeah.
So there was, the Typhoons, they were powerful in that, but the engine durability was terrible. I mean, I think every one of those failed, those turbos, right? Just about every one. We sat around the table and we said, if we're going to do, what can we do that's different? It hasn't been done before. And we were down to two options. The first option was a supercharged V8 full-size pickup. And the other option was a V8, a small compact truck. Okay. So what we did is we built prototypes of both. Like I said, that's the one thing we always did. We always, once we would talk about it, but we wouldn't go through a lot of paper analysis. We just built prototypes. Okay.
Well, let me stop you for a sec. So how often, just before you go any further, how often did you build something and then decide, like, what's the ratio of like it to don't like it? If you build 5 prototypes, how many of them for different vehicles?
We never built 5 prototypes. What are you
nuts? No, I mean, like 5 different machines, right? So there's over, a few years, what's the hit rate on that stuff? Did most of them end up making it? Or
well, I used to have a graveyard wall behind my office door.
Yeah.
And the programs that didn't make it, for example, we did one program was the CT 120 turbo, which was the old it was the old Escort, but it wasn't the Escort, it was the ZX. You know it as the ZX2.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, we did a turbo coupe of that. It didn't work. Paul Newman came in and told Neil Ressler, my vice president, he says, you guys ought to do a sleeper station wagon, Taurus wagon. So we put a Taurus show engine in right. And after we built it and drove it, we said that dog ain't gonna hunt. So that ended up in the graveyard. There was quite a few. We did a Thunderbird.
Yeah.
On the surface, it should have worked fine, but it didn't cut the mustard when we actually built it. So, yeah, I would say we ended up with about 9 programs in the graveyard.
So how soon do you know? You get in the thing and in the first 5 feet, or an hour later after driving more?
Our group was pretty what do you call opinionated.
Yeah.
and the opinions that fly pretty early. I mean, it was pretty quick. I mean, if the car had some problem, or we didn't like it, or it wasn't fast enough, we would voice our opinion, and it would, unless we could fix it, how do we overcome that problem? You talk about, we knew right away. We built when we were thinking about doing the 2003, we were given the program because the mainstream used to have the Cobra program, and then we were asked to take it over. There is no 2002 Cobra.
Yeah.
Okay. So we were asked, Bob Rui was the group vice president of sales and marketing. He says, John, we want you guys to take over the Cobra design. All right. So we built the naturally aspirated Cobra, right?
Yeah.
And we were on one of our test trips evaluating it, and we were just south of Badwater, which is in Death Valley. And this thing was just, it was just not turning the sun. Okay. So then Andy Slankard pulls up alongside of me. He has the SVT Focus. He has
Is
his
another one of your
prototype.
engineers, or
Yeah, he was one of my program managers for the Focus.
okay?
And I told him we were on this road, it's just south of Badwater. I says, let's do a second gear roll. Wide open throttle. Let's
Yeah,
see.
right.
And when the Focus pulled away from the Cobra, I went livid. I was
Right.
livid. I said, this is no Cobra. This is not even a goddamn garter snake. I said, this is it. We're not doing it. Right. And, but in that case there, see, there was that case there, everybody wanted to do a Cobra.
Yeah.
And the fact that this naturally aspirated thing wasn't going to work, the guys right on the spot said, well, maybe what if we supercharge it? Because we had just done the supercharged Lightning, right?
Yeah.
I said, well, let's build one. He says, this thing, I said, I can't get behind this thing. This thing ain't going to work. This is an embarrassment. I said, as a matter of fact, I went into the gas station when there was a gas station down there near I-15. I went in and I bought a, what Alpo dog food is?
Yeah, I do.
They had a
Yeah.
six can pack. I bought it. I put it in the car. I said, this thing doesn't even deserve the dog food. We're not doing it, guys. We killed. I mean, at that point there was no Cobra. That prototype was not going to fly.
Yeah.
But then the guy said, "Let us try," and that's what ended up becoming the Terminator.
Yeah. Right.
When we supercharged it.
Right. Okay.
But you sit there and say, we were a really informal group with a heavy product focus. Everybody really wanted to do something special.
Yeah.
Something they could be proud of. We weren't being driven by, budget or, the kind of things that normal how many people we could have working for us and all that kind of stuff. The group was pretty product focused, which was that's where you got to give the credit to. I mean, if it wasn't for that, a lot of the products wouldn't have happened. But there's an example of the first prototype wasn't going to fly, but the group didn't want to give up on the Cobra.
Yeah.
Okay.
So before we go down the Cobra road, I just wanted to kind of wrap up the Lightning thing. So how do you know? So, you mentioned that the first Lightning was not a bad product, but just not the product that was needed, right? And there's a difference between a good car.
It was not a performance.
Okay.
In my estimation, it was not what you call a performance product.
Okay. So it's simply just.
It was sporty. It was sporty.
Right.
And that's it.
Okay. So it was simply just a case of you looked at it and it wasn't enough, right? It was that knee-jerk feeling.
It didn't excite. It didn't excite you. I mean, it was. Yeah. I drove it around. Yeah, it was good on the handling course. It was good around everything. But I mean, if I'm driving down the east side Gratiot and I can't take anybody on with it, it ain't gonna beat anybody. Yeah. It's just not gonna. It's just not gonna impress.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so then getting back to the Lightning story. So now we're down to two products. We built the Ranger and we built the F-150.
Mm-hmm.
The marketing guys insisted because they were all concerned about the prior Lightning not meeting their sales expectations. We did market research. I said, all right. So we took these two products out and we did market research. And both products, I mean, every customer that got out of, especially the what ended up being the F-150, these customers would drive these cars and they just had smiles on their face from ear to ears. I mean, this is one hell, that car was just plush and powerful. I don't know if you've ever driven a 99 Lightning. Very nice.
Not a long time. I like it a lot. But.
Yeah. The Ranger was impressive too, but didn't create as big a smile as the Lightning, the F-150 was,
Yeah.
The other thing the Ranger had going for it, people were talking about canceling the compact truck.
Right.
So we weren't going to have enough years left on the cycle. In other words, you can't build a brand if there's no base vehicle to build on, right? The Ranger was going away. So you combine this, we called it the smile maker. The supercharged F-150 was just a smile maker. We knew it was going to be around. The F-150, the F-Series was going to be around. The Ranger was in question. So we went back and said, guys, we're going with the F-150. And it was our decision. And we just did it. And we used to have a group, the people that would approve our programs were called the stakeholders.
Yeah.
It was all the corporate vice presidents. We can get them together at the test track.
Yeah.
And the way we would sell programs, unlike the normal people would go through books and reports and charts and graphs and everything else. You know what we do? We'd get the group together. We'd have the prototypes out in front. We'd explain to them how we got to this decision.
Right.
We hand them the keys, let them drive it. They'd come back in and say, approved or not approved. It was not a paper intensive exercise.
Yeah.
Which was, from my standpoint, that's the way to do it. You know, if you're building cars, you know, to impress people, build the car and let the ultimate approvers decide. Yeah, do I want them to build this car or not?
We kind of have to talk about the Ford GT. It's the most well-known product from your time at the company, but it's also one of the things that hit emotionally the hardest for people outside the Ford sphere, right? That car means something to people for whom performance Ford may not even register, right? This tie to this amazing time in company history, a reference back to when Ford was at the height of its powers, the Le Mans wins, all of it. But also in a modern sense, it was this proof that the company could still do great world-beating work at the highest level. You know, supercars are, a lot of people believe they're extremely easy to do because you have giant budget, but they're easy and difficult in different ways, right?
Yeah.
You're nodding your head. So one of the things you told reporters later on was that even if it's an echo of the thing you said earlier, right? Even if you failed when you got that program, you knew you'd be no better off than if you hadn't tried it. But I got stuck on that with this car in particular, because you're talking about a major manufacturer for its centennial making a flagship halo car that everybody pays attention to. What does failing even look like in that situation? You know, if that comes apart for you, how does that work?
Well, here, first off, if you're a real car enthusiast and you get a chance to work for an automotive company,
yeah,
and you have an opportunity to make some product decisions along the way, I contend to you that those guys always want to do a supercar. Now, in my history, the first car we did was, do you remember the Mach 3? We did a 2-seat in 93.
Yeah.
I always wanted to do a supercar, right? Even though we were working on the Mustang, we went and did a Mach 3. Later on in 95, we did a thing called the GT90 concept car. Another two with 4 turbos on a V12, 4 turbos.
I remember seeing it on the cover of Road and Track and just losing my mind. I was like 12.
I mean, those were just crazy ideas that came out of my noggin. Okay. And I was able to pull it off. Yeah. And then we come along and Bill Ford says for the centennial, he said to me, he says, I'd like to do something really special. I said, well, let's go. We're going to go noodle on it, see what, we can come up with. Right. And there was a lot of people at the time. I was getting a lot of input, we should do a car like a Viper. I mean, we should do a car like a Corvette. We should do a car like, all this kind of stuff. And you know what the decision was? I said, look, guys, I don't want to do a Me Too car. If we do a car like a Viper, we could do a car like a Viper. But guess what? It would be, we'd be called a Me Too.
Car like
Corvette,
a Viper. Yeah.
Corvette. I don't want to do a Corvette style car. Corvette owns that market. I don't even want to, I don't want to play in their sandbox. Okay. I said, there's only one thing. And we went back through, I said, there's only one thing that's genuine Ford in the supercar world. And that's the Ford GT or the GT40. And he says, nobody's ever built a sports car or a car like that. We don't, it's not like we're going to go to a parts bin because we don't have a parts bin to build a car like that. Everything had to be done ground up. But we said, you know what? I think we can, we got a group together. I said, I think we can pull it off. It's going to be tough. Now, the real problem was that the centennial was in 2003. We didn't get the okay until second quarter of 2002. Okay. Now think about it. We're gonna do a car we've never built before.
Right.
And in 1 year, the company wants to showcase these cars.
Yeah.
Jesus. I mean, this is mind-boggling, the thing. But again, we put it to the team. We assembled a team, and I had both teams. Actually, I ended up teams on 2 sides of the building. One was a GT team, and I still had my SVT guys.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, we got to build one prototype for the Centennial for sure. You got to have a car to show, to wow the audience, because they had they had Beyonce there that night at the Centennial. I mean, yeah,
Wait, what? Really?
Oh, they had thousands of people. It was a big show.
Was there.
Yeah, she was the main attraction, And anyhow, so then I decided, I said, well, look, guys, if we can do one, we can do 3 cars. And my guy said to me, what do you want to do 3 prototypes for? I said, red, white, and blue. I was really on this patriotic, this is not an Italian car. It's not an English car. It's not it's an American car. We're going to have 3 prototypes, red, white, and blue. Yeah. And so we ended up building those 3 cars. And I'll tell you, if you look at what we launched at the Centennial, those cars for prototypes were pretty damn close to what the final production cars actually looked like. I mean, we couldn't sell them. I mean, they weren't certified or anything, but they were so close. And I mean, that group really did a hell of a job. That team, they did a hell of a job.
Wasn't the final development, like the final, job time on it was it was like 24 or 26 months.
26 months, 26 months.
That's nuts, especially for a car like that, especially for a car that's sorted, right? The GT is we're talking about something that had to meet Ford durability standards, quality standards, all down the line. But so you mentioned talking to your team about this and how, you had how big was the team at the time that actually worked on that car?
Our team, well, what I did there is I leveraged a lot of suppliers.
Okay.
So in the actual building, we probably had, I'm going to guess 160 people.
Okay.
And I'd say about 25 to 28 of them were Ford employees. Everybody else was supplier. I mean, the suppliers were just gaga to get on. I mean, think about it. You're a supplier and you're being asked to work on a supercar like that.
Right.
So, everybody was on site. I said, we couldn't do this. The one thing that I always believed in, and we did it with the Mustang, was co-location, a dedicated co-located team. That's key. Because if every meeting requires I get in my car and go to this building or go to that state or go to that other city, and I mean, you're just wasting a lot of time commuting. I said, if you're co-located and dedicated, there's only one thing that is important to that team, and that is to get the car done. So we put everybody together. Our prototype shop was right next door, right? And that's where the focus is. The focus is the product, and it works marvelously well. I mean, at least in my experiences, that's the way to do it.
So
rather than having fragmented groups supporting all over the place,
So when you have that 24 core group of Ford people, how do you? So you're up against a clock. You're up against metrics, right? It has to be as good as anything else in the world with the numbers. It has to be emotional.
Well, we knew what it had to be. And we bought the Modena, the F360. Yeah. And the other thing is, and I just clarify,
please.
Whereas the Modena was, I think, the finest sports car you could buy at the time. And it was, I don't know if you've ever driven an
F360. Yeah, they're great.
Wonderful car. Much better than the 355 that preceded it. Much better. To me, that was an outstanding car. And I said, that's it, guys. That's the image vehicle that we got to beat. We got to kick this car's ass in every possible metric that we can.
So, okay. So if you know all of those things and you know where you have to go, you know where you are, you know what you're making, and yet that pressure is like that pressure cooker of time is going to define the program. How do you talk to your people when there's so much on the line and so much pressure and chance for things to go wrong? And yet you want them to know that and be aware of that, but not feel that pressure and do their best. How do you present that to them? How do you talk to them?
Well, like I said, we had a small group of Ford people that were guiding the program with the suppliers, but you wouldn't know if you walked into that room, you wouldn't know who was Ford and who was the suppliers. I mean, it was just the GT team.
Yeah.
I used a thing called, rather than having, in the Ford system, normally you build a car, it gets evaluated for this. There's a whole sequence of events that has to go on. Well, we didn't have time for the sequence. So we just launched everything in parallel. Everybody was, and we said, we all got to be here at a certain time. Everybody's got to show up with their stuff.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's the climate control, the engine. I mean, think about it. We even did an all new engine in that car.
So when you said launch in parallel, you mean every single part of the car was running concurrently?
Yeah. The teams all had their individual responsibilities. And it was just like, if I had to liken it to anything, ever see those land grabs they did, the Oklahoma land grabs with the Conestoga wagons, and the guy said, okay, go.
Yeah.
It was like you launched the team. Excuse me. You launched
Just going in all directions. Right.
They all knew where they had to go, right? They
Right.
just and you better get there on a certain time. And the team was empowered,
Yeah.
and everybody felt committed to the goal. I mean, there was nobody on that team there was nobody on that team that we had to drag along.
So, there's this point, and I'm fascinated with all the stuff that goes on in our subconscious as we're making decisions, right? The stuff that we're not actually thinking about, but that our brains are while we're doing other things. And there's this point in, like, people see it in relationships. They see it in, like in car accidents. You see it where anything that we do ongoing, where you can kind of sniff out that something bad is about to happen, or alternatively, that something good is about to happen, right? That things are working out. Like, I met my wife, and I kind of, quietly early on. So the Ford GT is this, and it's interesting too, because you look at the cars that have come out since in that realm from a bunch of different companies, including Ford, and none of them have quite hit that same emotional beat. It is this deeply relevant, deeply emotionally interesting, deeply compelling thing that happens to be a hell of a lot of fun to drive, and it looks great, and they are worth what they should be, if not going in the direction of being genuinely worth what they should be. But it's this landmark moment. Do you have any inkling of that when the program was going together? Or it was just, we're going to make this great, it's going to be great, and it's going to happen? Or do you realize in the process that it's turning into something more than just another car?
Well, we wanted to do a car. First off, like I say, we wanted to beat Ferrari. Ford beat Ferrari in '66.
Sure, right.
In racing, we were going to do the best sports car value on the road, and that was really our objective. And I'll give you an example here. We said the original objective for the car was 500 horsepower. Okay, and the team, you know what they did? They came back and they said, "John, we got 550." See, I didn't push them to 550, but they knew that was, they knew more was better for me, right? And that's the kind of stuff, that, in the Ford system, everybody tell you, well, we're at 498. We need more money to go do more testing, to go do another manifold. That's the kind of nonsense you get in the mainstream. When it's a committed team like this, and they all want to do a product that's exceptional, they actually brought more to the party than we asked for. Think about that. I asked for 500, he gave me 550, right? Top speed, because they really did quite a bit on aero. I sent a group off to Nardo. You know where Nardo is? The test track in southern Italy there?
Yep, big bowl.
So I sent a couple of young fellows with one of our prototypes there, and every day they'd call me and say, well, what's the car doing? What's the car? Well, we're at 208.57. We're at 209.7. And kept going. Finally, they got to 211.89. I said, okay, guys, wrap it up. Come on home. Now, we had already put the top speed at 205 because it's tire limited.
Yeah.
But I wanted to know what the car could actually do. And Nardo, if you go to the Nardo, because Nardo has all the history on all the cars that have ever been run there. Right. 211.89 is what the Ford GT did. The guys, everybody wanted to do more than we had asked for. And that's the kind of group that's fun to work with, right?
Yeah.
Everybody was committed to excelling, not just to meeting an objective, to beating the objectives.
It's such an interesting tweak, right? Because it gets back to something we talk about a lot here, which is the notion that so much of good management comes down to figuring out how to make your people care about what they're doing, and then just run. And 9 times out of 10, they'll surprise you, and they'll do more than they would have otherwise if you had micromanaged them or followed them or pointed them at every step, right? Mm-hmm. So we're unfortunately about out of time, but we have a minute for one more thing. We do this at the end of every episode here. We have this question we ask everybody who comes on the show to kind of close things out. It's a simple thing, but the answers vary for everybody. And the answer that you give ends up saying a lot about you, right? So it's a one-line question. Just give the first answer that comes to mind. Sound good?
Sure.
Okay. So what's the first thing that goes through your head when things go wrong? Could be a word, could be a feeling, could be a picture of anything.
Well, something goes wrong is how to fix it.
You've passed the test. You are John Coletti.
Yeah, you got to fix it.
Thanks. That's a pretty good answer.
This topic of failure, I thought to myself, failure is not an option. Right? right?
It's been a pleasure, John. Thank you for taking the time.
Sam, my pleasure too. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.